SLT Fibre and experience the power of fibre technology. Sri Lanka's only super fast internet connection. SLT Fibre. Call 1212 now.
Making headlines tonight. Crossroads. PM vows to end the marriage.
Executive presidency, which we are committed to abolish due to its profound powers that have been exploited and abused by its incumbent with impunity.
68th anniversary. The Sri Lanka Freedom Party celebrates the milestone as uncertainty hangs in the air. In the dock. International Federation of Accountants questions government accounting mechanism.
We do not know the total assets of the country, and we do not know the total liabilities of the country. We do not know whether the net worth of the country is growing or eroding.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9. This Tuesday, the 3rd of September 2019.
Nama Lifebuoy Cool Fresh saha Lemon Fresh, Menthol saha Lemon Sare. Dahatiya kanda ඇති කරන සංගවුණු විස බීජ වලින් ආරක්ෂා කර ඔබව fresh කරයි. විස බීජ off, fresh එක on.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and a warm welcome to First at 9 on AdaDerana 24, bringing you news from across Sri Lanka and around the world. Tonight, I'm Indiva Riyamuatta. Let's start off with your top story. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is in the Maldives, pledges to support the archipelago in their fight against rising sea levels and global warming. Addressing the Maldivian Parliament, Premier Wickremesinghe proposed the Maldivian President Ibrahim Soli that the two countries work together at international fora in dealing with the issue.
Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe addressed the Maldives Parliament this morning.
Today, the major features of Westminster parliamentary government exist side by side with an executive presidency, which we are committed to abolish due to its profound powers that have often been exploited and abused by its incumbent with impunity. Very soon, we will be tabling a bill to establish a parliamentary budget office. But the challenge is not over. The abuse of democratic space, for example, through hate speech and fake news, are some of the new dangers. The social media is like a god of ancient times, both the creator and the destroyer. Finding a balance between the democratization of news and the legal obligations of the user to prevent harm is the complex question that which you and many countries have to grapple with. The Easter Sunday bombing by sympathizers of the IS was a radically different terrorist attack. We have learned a lot from this tragic experience, and today Sri Lanka stands ready to work with all stakeholders to establish an effective mechanism for regional cooperation to counter IS terrorism.
Premier Wickremesinghe went on to speak about trade relations between the two countries.
Today, the diversification of trade is a strong component of the bilateral relations between Sri Lanka and Maldives. The value of total trade between the two countries, which stood at $271 million in 2017, increased to $304 million in 2018. Of late, there has been an increase in the number of employment opportunities for Sri Lankans in the Maldives. I have no doubt that Sri Lankans can supply more professional and skilled workers, particularly in the fields of construction, hospitality, and education. We are also looking at offering more higher education opportunity in Sri Lanka for Maldivian students and more education opportunities for Maldivian and Sri Lankan students in Maldives. How our two legislative assemblies could work together, the common ground. We have already appointed one of our members of parliament, Honorable Rauf Hakim, to initiate the discussions on behalf of Sri Lanka.
Afterwards, the Speaker of Maldivian Parliament, Mohammad Nasheed, handed over a copy of the oldest written document in Maldivian history.
Winning your trust above all. We are HNB Assurance.
The Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna presidential candidate Gotabaya Rajapaksa pledges to never allow privatization of state institutions under his leadership. Speaking at a forum organised by the SLPP today, he further reiterated his commitment to ensure that trade agreements will never allow for sale of the country's resources as preconditions for economic development in the island. Meanwhile, speaking at the same forum today, SLPP leader, opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa noted that while the UNP continues squabbling over their presidential candidate, the party is well on its way to achieving victory at the upcoming presidential election.
Sri Lanka Podujana Peremuna's presidential hopeful Gotabaya Rajapaksa met with trade union representatives from the Department of Samurdhi Development in Colombo today. Leader of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peremuna opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa also attended the meeting.
When we propose bringing about a disciplined society in the country, there are some who allege that this will be done by introducing a military government. We did not need even one checkpoint or barrier in the north because we established an investigative network through our intelligence unit and there was no room for such terror incidents to take place. When we found out that there was a threat, we were able to immediately deal with it at its roots. But now that our intelligence network has been dismantled, we witnessed a spate of explosions. Many crimes take place in this country. There are shootings in broad daylight, families are being killed, an explosion on Easter Sunday claimed the lives of 300. But we do not see the CID looking into these issues. Instead, there is a group of 20 from the division who are currently in Hambantota to see if Gotabaya Rajapaksa's name is on the 2005 electoral list. They're not looking into the matters that should be looked into. Today there were officials who went to the immigration department to see when Gotabaya Rajapaksa changed his passport and when he obtained it in order to produce a report by this evening. This is the current state of the nation.
Meanwhile, another gathering was held in Colombo today where presidential candidate Gotabaya Rajapaksa and opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa met with trade union representatives from the Joint Trade Union Federation.
In most advanced Asian countries, we see private institutions developing hand in hand with state institutions. Under our government, we will ensure that we develop all state institutions rather than opting for privatization. When it comes to agreements, we will ensure that it is only for trade and our economic hubs are not being sold to other nations.
President Maithripala Sirisena declares that the presidential election campaign of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party is now underway. Addressing the 68th anniversary celebration of the party, the head of state held Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe responsible for the failure to hold provincial council elections on time.
The 68th anniversary of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party commenced at 3 p.m. today at the Sukadasa Indoor Stadium under the patronage of Chairman of the party, President Maithripala Sirisena. Some of the notable politicians to attend the event were leader of the Lanka Samasamaja Party, Professor Tissavitharana, leader of the Democratic Left Front, Vasudevanana Akara, chairman of the Jatika Helurumaya, Minister Partli Champika Ranawaka, leader of Tamil Progressive Alliance, Minister Mano Ganeshan, leader of All Ceylon Makkal Congress, Rishad Badiuddin, leader of People's United Front, Dinesh Gunawardena, leader of Pivituru Helurumaya, Udaya Gammanpila, leader of Sri Lanka Communist Party, D.W. Gunasekara. Advisor of the SLFP, former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga also participated in the party's 68th anniversary themed Decision is for the Right Hand.
Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga Methiniya අපි මේ 68 වෙනි අභිමානවත් සමුළුවට මේ මොහොතේදී
We were part of a national government following a decision by the party. Many asked us to leave the government so they could come and join our party. So today we have left the national government. I'm inviting all of you to come join with us to strengthen the SLFP. None of the leftist parties, including the SLFP, can work with the UNP. The political culture, working methods, principles, perspectives of the two factions are very different from each other. Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe took our vote for the 19th Amendment after promising us that there will be a mixed electoral system which will ensure a responsible MP for a division. But he deceived us and the country. Time has come for us to recognise our closest political allies. I would like to say that our closest political allies aren't Ranil, Sajith or Karu. The upcoming presidential election is going to be a decisive one. No one can ensure more than 47% in the election this time. Any vote surpassing the 47% will be ensured only because of the SLFP.
The
other faction in the national government did things which I could never approve of, things that are not suitable for the country. This modern liberalism is not suitable for our nation. Those responsible of the biggest act of fraud to have taken place in the country, the central bank bond scam, must leave the government. They talk about the upcoming presidential election as if they are still gentlemen. All documents needed for the extradition of Arjuna Mahendran are prepared. Documents to file legal cases against gentlemen bigger than Arjuna Mahendran are also prepared. Terms of all provincial councils have ended now, and no one can hold provincial council elections either. Thousands of officials at these councils are not working, but they are being paid. The wealth of these councils exceed trillions of rupees. They have put an end to the election system to hold the provincial council election as well. The Supreme Court informed me that the election cannot be held because the Prime Minister failed to present the relevant report from the Parliament. This is why I named the Prime Minister as the first respondent in the case. As per the 19th Amendment, the next president will have no power. He will not even have the Defence Ministry under his purview. All those necessary powers will be vested with the Prime Minister. This is why I think the SLFP should focus more on appointing a Prime Minister than a President. We need a comprehensive political front, which is progressive and humane. We commenced our presidential campaign today. Many ask me as to who will be the presidential candidate and who will receive our support. I would like to tell you that it will be us who are going to establish the government in 2020 as per our political principles.
The Bar Association of Sri Lanka told the Supreme Court today that the State Intelligence Service has submitted 97 intelligence reports on National Tawhid Jamaat leader Zaharan Hashim to the Inspector General of Police and the former Defence Secretary from year 2016 to the 21st of April this year. The 12 fundamental rights petitions filed against former Defence Secretary Hemasiri Fernando and IGP Pooja Jayasundara for allegedly failing to prevent the Easter Sunday terror attacks and thereby violating fundamental human rights were taken up before a 7-member judge bench of the Supreme Court chaired by Chief Justice Jayantha Jayasuriya. President's counsel Sanjeeva Jayawardena told the judge bench that senior DIG Nilantha Jayawardena, in an affidavit submitted to the Supreme Court, had revealed that the State Intelligence Service had submitted 97 reports on the ringleader of Easter Sunday terror attacks from 2006 up until the day coordinated terror attacks took place on Easter Sunday this year. The petitions were filed by 12 parties, including the Sri Lanka Bar Association. The petitioners argue that the IGP had the former Defence Secretary of infringing the fundamental rights of the people by failing to prevent the terror attacks on churches and hotels, even when intelligence information had forewarned. Taking you to other local news, Sri Lanka is in the process of taking action on UN Security Council resolutions on countering violent extremism. This came as a reminder from Foreign Secretary Ravinatha Adesinghe to Executive Director of Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, Dr. Khalid Kozier, who was in Sri Lanka recently at the invitation of the Foreign Ministry. Sri Lanka has also sought expertise in preventing violent extremism from the fund, highlighting violent extremism as the biggest threat to national security here.
During his meeting with visiting Executive Director of the Global Community Engagement and Resilience Fund, Dr. Kosa, Foreign Minister Tilak Marapana pointed out that addressing violent extremism in Sri Lanka must be done in the context where the majority Sri Lankan Muslim community has collaborated with the government in apprehending the culprits connected to the Easter Sunday attacks. The Minister further highlighted the value of community policing, where extreme elements must be identified and dealt with at the early stages of radicalization. The Minister also raised the dilemma of dealing with individuals who return from conflict areas, which is an issue faced by many countries. Dr. Kosa in the meantime underlined that national ownership, effective coordination and the local context for any preventing violent extremism program is central to GCERF assistance. At an interactive dialogue with relevant government stakeholders at the Defence Ministry co-chaired by Defence Secretary Shantha Kottegoda and Foreign Secretary Ravinatha Arya Singha, the Foreign Secretary said that any PBE measures should be tailor-made to suit the local context and adopt a whole-of-government approach. He also reminded that Sri Lanka is in the process of taking action on UN Security Council resolutions on countering violent extremism, which all member states are obliged to comply with.
A Gazette Extraordinary was issued today confirming that the election for the Alpetia Pradesh Sabha will take place on the 11th of October this year. The Gazette was issued by the returning officer of Galle District. On the 30th of August, the Supreme Court ordered the Elections Commission to hold the elections of the Alpetia Pradesh Sabha after accepting nominations by the Democratic United National Front. The DUNF had previously lodged a petition over their nominations being rejected for the local authorities election of the Alpetia Pradesh Sabha, citing it to be an injustice. Delivering the verdict of the petition, the judge bench ordered the Election Commission to accept the rejected nominations of the DUNF. On the 30th of January last year, the Supreme Court issued an interim injunction preventing elections being held for the Alpetia Pradesh Sabha after considering the petition filed by the DUNF in connection with the local authorities election. Australian Task Force head once again emphasises that no Sri Lankan should attempt to seek asylum in Australia illegally. Speaking to media held at the Negombo Harbour today, Commander of the Joint Agency Task Force Operation Sovereign Borders re-emphasised the Australian government's strict stand on illegal immigration since there are adequate avenues for legal migration.
We return immediately anyone that comes by boat. So all of the people that arrived recently in those 3 boats have all been returned to Sri Lanka, and that occurred within days of those boats being intercepted. To get to Australia, the legal system comes into play, but ultimately I'm all about deterring and disrupting ventures from getting to Australia in the first place, and I feel well supported by my Sri Lankan colleagues in making sure that happens. And no Sri Lankans have arrived in Australia since 2013. They've all been returned. If you go back to its Operation Sovereign Borders started in 2013, we have returned 865 people from 37 boats to their countries of departure or their countries of origin. This includes 204 Sri Lankans from 12 boats. Australia and Sri Lanka work closely together to ensure that both of our national security aims are met and that there is zero chance.
Message they want to send, and is the message that we want to tell you: don't get into the traps of the human smugglers, don't waste your money, don't try losing your life trying to go to Australia by boat.
When members of media asked as to why the delegation was taken to the Negombo Harbour specifically, Rear Admiral Artigala had this to say.
One thing is we want to show, being Sri Lankan Navy, we want to show the Australians how difficult it is for us to monitor each and every boat. It's about 600 plus boats here, and checking each and every boat for illegal activities is quite difficult.
Speaker Karu Jayasuriya highlighted the importance of solving issues of children living in conflict-prone or post-conflict areas with commitment, sensitivity and without prejudice towards any ethnicity. He was speaking at the South Asia Parliamentarians Platform for Children held in Colombo today. The forum was to discuss key issues in the region in relation to the rights of a child.
We are aware that a child living in a conflict-prone or post-conflict region has very different challenges than a child who lives in an affluent neighborhood. And you may agree that each of these situations require a specialized, targeted and tailor-made approaches. All must be involved in these efforts with a commitment, sensitivity and without prejudice to any ethnic, religious or political considerations. Modern technology advanced society in its interaction with age-old social traditions and endangered the new complex challenges in relation to our children. For instance, effects of social media on our children is one such matter that requires our careful attention. Yet another matter is the imposition of social conduct based exclusively on age-old religious and communal traditions which could affect children who live in modern-day societies. Sri Lankan authorities and this parliament are making efforts to carefully examine in such situation in my country with a view to evolving acceptable solution without prejudice to individual and community identities. In this context, we all need to eschew extremism and promote tolerance and moderation with a view to finding lasting solutions for communal practices that affect children, especially the girl child.
What challenges does Sri Lanka face in transports and logistics? We'll talk about all that and much more after this short break. Welcome back. In today's world, mobility has become one of the most important factors of society, and there is much a middle-income country such as Sri Lanka must learn. With that being the case, the largest conference in terms of transport and logistics will be hosted by Sri Lanka from the 9th to the 11th this month. It is a conference that university researchers from this part of the world look very much forward to, and its co-organizers, Sri Lanka Society of Transport and Logistics, hopes that the conference will be a platform to bring solutions to some of the most pressing mobility issues Sri Lanka is currently faced with.
Although the right to freedom of movement is preserved in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, its scope moves further than being only a human right to become a foundation of a healthy economy. It has been found that in many cities or remote areas with poor mobility have high unemployment rates and low income levels. According to the Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation, the average speed in major corridors of Colombo during peak hours has reduced to around 12 km per hour. The loss of productive time increases cost and productivity losses, as well as waste of foreign exchange on fuel. Issues surrounding mobility remains one of the biggest challenges to Sri Lanka, which is a middle-income country with inadequate capacity to build mobility infrastructure.
Mobility is one of the most important things that society requires now, and people do not like spending time traveling between their places of interest. This is one of the main challenges that faces the world, and particularly in middle-income countries, developing countries, where we do not have the infrastructure, or infrastructure is very expensive to build. It takes time to build, and therefore we must know how best to manage the infrastructure that we have.
In a backdrop where Sri Lanka is in a dire need to understand requirements for managing mobility infrastructure the country already has, the 13th International Conference of the Eastern Asia Society for Transportation Studies is being organized to be held from 9 to the 11th of September. Themed Redesigning Transport and Logistics for the Rise of Asia, the conference will bring 400 local and international researchers on transport and mobility from 29 countries. It aims to create a professional environment to discuss issues in transport and logistics and recommend sustainable solutions for improvement through research and development in collaboration with the transport and logistic industry.
This conference comes at a time where Sri Lanka is also investing a large amount of money for the rapid development of transport. Having such attention on demand-based studies, on evidence-based decision-making is very important to ensure that not only in Sri Lanka, but in all the other developing countries that are represented at this conference, that we make wise and prudent decisions. So this kind of research finding will help us to improve our transportation system.
Chairman of the International Federation of Accountants and Commissioner of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Arjuna Herat, says that the country's assets and liabilities remain unknown owing to the government's failure to implement proper accounting mechanisms, such as accrual accounting within its institutions. This, he says, is one of the main barriers to leveraging the country's full potential and leaves space for corruption and bribery to continue within the system.
The AAT Sri Lanka Conference 2019 was held last evening under the auspices of Minister of Megapolis and Western Development, Partly Champik Ranawaka, and Minister of Economic Reforms and Public Distribution, Dr. Harsha De Silva.
Our country is not in a position to prepare a balance sheet and does not have one. As a result, we do not know the total assets of the country, and we do not know the total liabilities of the country. Therefore, we do not know whether the net worth of the country is growing or eroding. This means we do not have the opportunity to hold the government responsible and accountable to managing the wealth of the country for the benefit of the people. This is one of the most significant reasons why this country is not in a position to leverage on the great potential the country has. To manage public finances well, including working capital and refinancing needs, an essential prerequisite is a balance sheet for the country, and a strong one at that. Hence, we must immediately adopt accrual accounting in the public sector. The absence of accrual accounting is also a cause for rampant corruption and bribery, as the transactions performed are not transparent, as the government does not prepare accounts on an accrual basis. Is this not something that we have to put right immediately? We as a profession and as citizens must demand this.
Now the 10% of our country's population living abroad. Today, the large exodus of Sri Lankan professionals, Sri Lanka is not a country worth living in, at least in their perception. One of the fundamental reasons is what can be termed as a debt trap. Today, we as a country are at the brink of financial crisis of unprecedented scale brought about by this vicious cycle of debt. The proportion of government debt obtained at commercial interest rates has been steadily rising, from 5% there in 2004 to the 55% there in 2018. We need to profit from the currents of economic growth while staying away from the geopolitical storms, the trade wars that have been there involving the major regional powers and the global superpowers.
Taking you to the stock market, the all-share price index ended 0.09% firmer at 5,883.42, with turnover nearly 800 million rupees. It fell 0.15% last week and 0.8% in August. Furthermore, foreign investors sold a net 193.4 million rupees worth of shares today. Here's a brief look at how the equities performed during the day.
The secondary bond market continued its lackluster sentiment, with overall market witnessing ultra-thin volumes during the day. Meanwhile, Central Bank announced an issue of 15 billion worth of treasury bills at the primary bill auction to be held tomorrow. The stock market rebounded to the positive territory, mainly on the gains made by Ascot Holdings. Crossings were recorded in Sampath, contributing 12% to the turnover. Volume recorded near one and a half month high, while foreigners continued to be net sellers for the third consecutive day.
In the currency market, the Sri Lankan rupee closed weaker, hovering near a 7-month closing low hit last week as continued foreign fund outflows from government securities after a surprise rate cut last month weighed on the currency. The rupee ended 0.6% weaker at 180.10 to 180.30 against the US dollar, compared with yesterday's close of 179.75 to 179.85. Here's a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies of the day today. The latest events shifting world politics coming up right after this short break. Let me take you to international news. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has threatened to purge any lawmaker in his party who votes against the government on Brexit, in a dramatic escalation of tensions ahead of a crucial week at Westminster. Reuters quoted a senior source in the Whip's office responsible for party enforcement as saying that any Conservative lawmaker who votes against the government this week would be thrown out of the parliamentary party and banned from standing standing for the Conservatives in the next election. But Johnson has a working majority of just one seat in the 650-seat chamber, meaning his threat to eject lawmakers such as the former Finance Minister Philip Hammond could lead to an election. Britain's Education Minister Gavin Williamson, himself a former Chief Whip, said Johnson did not want to call an election, but it was right to threaten any lawmakers with this election because they were undermining Britain's position within Brussels. Well, the second international T20 between New Zealand and Sri Lanka is currently underway at the Pallekele International Stadium in Kandy. Opting to bat first, the hosts put on 161 runs for the loss of 9 wickets, with Niroshan Dickwella top scoring with 39 runs, chasing 162. For the win, the Black Caps are currently on 79 for the loss of 3 wickets. Taking you to tennis, it was another disappointing result for defending champion Naomi Osaka as she was dumped out of the tournament in straight sets. Her form has seen a considerable dip since she split with her coach last year following the US Open win. Let's take a look at how some high-profile players got on yesterday.
For a 4th Flushing Meadows title. Mateo. In the women's draw, Canadian teenager Bianca Andreescu battled past American qualifier Taylor Townsend 6-1, 4-6, 6-2. Arguably, the day's biggest upset came when defending champion and top seed Naomi Osaka was dumped out of the...
And that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining us. Good night.